Hey everybody. One of our learning objectives for this week is to be able to describe what is meant by the social construction of difference. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time just talking about the term social construction. If this is the first time that you're hearing that term or really trying to delve into what it is, it can be a little challenging to wrap your head around. So I wanted to try to give us a couple of different ways that we can think about it. Berger and Luckman literally wrote the book on social construction. They say that reality is socially constructed and that the sociology of knowledge must analyze the process in which this occurs. So what Berger and Luckman essentially are saying is that in society, our collective reality is constructed by our shared values that then become institutionalized in our social institutions, whether it's our government, our educational system. Um, Social construction is an interactive process that occurs between individuals and with and within our larger social institutions, and that we need to understand how this interaction happens and how values become institutionalized and a part of our society. Um, and I realize that is a mouthful. um, Another way to think about it, I have this quote over here in the red box, and this quote is from Amiri Baraka, who was a prominent poet in the Black Arts movement, and he's pretty controversial due to his political beliefs. But I had an opportunity to attend a lecture that he gave many years ago, and I wrote down this statement that he made at that lecture, and it's something that I've come back to time and time again whenever I'm writing about or talking about social construction. And it's also a statement that has very much influenced me as a social worker. And Baraka said, "You write about what you see outside your window, and they call it social protest." For me, how I've always interpreted that statement is that when someone or a group of people who are oppressed speak out about their daily reality, about what they are experiencing on a day-to-day basis, or when a client is sharing what their reality is, what they see outside their window, what they experience on their street, in their house, on their block, and when it gets dismissed as simply being social protest or complaining, we're failing to validate the reality of somebody's experience, um, rather than affirming it and validating it. And, just because our experience may be different does not make someone else's experience any less real or valid. Um, so that statement for me is something that has a lot of power and a lot of relevance to this idea of social construction, because as you see in the videos that we're watching this week, and in the readings for this week, particularly the ones that deal with privilege, which I'm going to talk a little more about in a minute as well. When you think about these concepts, these ideas of privilege, whether it's white privilege, male privilege, heterosexual privilege, economic class privilege, these are all ideas that we have built through our society, through transmitting our values and institutionalizing values that create these inequalities. Let me go to this next slide here. So, promise there will be no science tests in this class, but and I'm not a physicist, but this is a picture of an atom, and this is for me visually a really good way to think about social construction. So imagine that this atom represents one individual in society. Pretend this atom is you. And here in the middle, in the nucleus, with these protons and neutrons, if I remember correctly, these are sort of your core experiences and values, right? And these are likely influenced by your family, by your gender, by your race, by your ethnicity, by your class. These are your core experiences and values that you hold as an individual, sort of the micro level. Out here, these, which I guess would be electrons if this were a physics class, these electrons, these represent the institutions that we interact with, or you interact with, whether it's a school or church or government or social services institutions. These are the institutions that we interact with at sort of the meso level. And then these giant loops or energy fields, these are the larger institutionalized values and beliefs that are impacting these social institutions and impacting us and us at our core as we interact in these settings. So I think of social construction as this interactive process where I am interacting with larger systems as well as interacting with other individuals who are interacting with larger systems. And that's how social realities become constructed, through this interaction among us, between us, and then within and with these larger systems. So I hope that visual helps kind of break this concept down a little bit more for you, and gets you thinking about this idea of social construction. So here's another quote I'm going to throw at you. This is from my 11th grade Italian teacher, Mr. Russo. I have no idea where he is today. But Mr. Russo used to say that language isn't words, it's the communication of ideas. And this is another really powerful statement that has always stuck with me and that I've very much been able to use, in my years as a social worker. We're all probably familiar with the saying that it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And when it comes to this statement, it's not necessarily the word or words that we're using, but it's the ideas communicated behind those words that matter and that construct these realities. And language is such a part of how we construct social realities in this country and how difference is constructed. So it's the communication of ideas. If I asked you what these symbols represent, I think we would all agree that the one on the left historically represents female. The one on the right represents male. If I asked you what it means to be female or what it means to be male, I think you each might give me a very different answer, because based on your experiences and your values, what gender means to you, how you choose to express your gender may be very different than how I choose to define or express my gender. However, historically in American society, there have been very specific meanings ascribed to each of these symbols. And that has been the source of a tremendous amount of inequality based on perceptions of women versus men. We want to talk about equal pay in the workforce, also related to homophobia, which to me ultimately comes down to an issue of gender, of people, choosing to be in relationships with people who society does not view as traditional or the norm. The meanings of male and female come into play when we're talking about the experiences of transgender individuals and the inequalities that exist within that community. So these images, it's not the images themselves or even the words female and male, but the ideas that society has constructed, that we as a society historically have constructed for each of these, that contributes to inequalities. So one of the things that you read about this week, or if you haven't completed the readings yet, you will read about, has to do with privilege, and specifically white privilege. The exercise I just went through with regard to these ideas of what is male and what is female could also relate to race, to class, to religion. We read this week about the concept of white privilege and how that has become institutionalized in our culture, and the fact that typically those who are in positions of privilege often deny that they are privileged or fail to have an awareness of that privilege. And white privilege is clearly the most obvious version of privilege in our society, but there are many others. And this link here, and I hope it works. If it doesn't work, please email me, and I will email it to you more directly so that you can access it. This link will take you to an exercise that I think is pretty well done. It's somewhat of an oversimplification, but but ultimately I think is a really good example that will help you understand this idea of privilege, and not just in terms of white privilege, but also in terms of other types of privilege as well. Sometimes the privilege are very obvious, but there are others that are more subtle. And this, what I liked about this exercise is that it really gets at some of the more subtle aspects of privilege that we may not always think about, and that it's really important for us to think about, not just as social workers, but as human beings. So please check this out. Some of you may have seen it before. It may have been making the rounds on social media, but check it out and think about how it makes you feel, and how privilege has impacted your personal values. And that should actually say, how has privilege impacted your personal values? I apologize for that typo there. So here's another example of social construction. The one I just gave you dealing with privilege pertains more to the individual level, but I wanted to give you an example of a more macro level example of social construction that sort of illustrates that atom that I showed you, the interaction of individuals with these larger social structures. And this is the case of Giel. And Giel is a town in Belgium. And some of you may have seen stories about Giel in the news previously. The town has been in the news quite a bit. And I'm not going to, I'll let you check out the link and read about the town, and I think it will become apparent why I selected this article. But the case of Giel presents a very different social construction of mental illness than what we see here in the US. And it's an example of the larger macro level social institution, as well as the values of the individuals in this particular town and how they interact and intersect to construct a social reality for individuals experiencing mental illness that is very different from what we do here in the US. And as you're watching this, think about the concept of mutual aid that you have read about this week or will read about this week. Also think about where you think this case falls on the residual institutional continuum that you're also reading about this week. So that's a really brief overview of social construction, and as I said in the beginning, it is a little bit of a difficult concept to wrap your brain around. It's a difficult concept to explain, but I hope that through this presentation, I've been able to help you think about it a little bit differently. If you have questions, definitely post them in the Ask the Instructor forum, or feel free to email me. I also be really curious to hear what everyone thinks about the check your privilege activity, as well as this article on Giel. So if you feel free to post thoughts if you have them after you check out both of these links. It's not graded, but I would be interested in getting your feedback to see if these are helpful tools for you to use to think about social construction. All right, thanks, and I'll talk to everybody soon.